And we continue learning Dirshu Mishnah Berurah Hilchais Tefillah. And we begin another incredible Siman Kuf Beis, a Siman in which the Mechaber coins Shloi Lahavsik Keneged HaMisbalel. One cannot be mafsik, one cannot interrupt, as we'll see, walk in front of one who is davening. Says the Mechaber in Sifalev Aser Leishi B'Teich Arba Amoy Shal Misbalel. You're not allowed to sit within 4 amos of one who is davening Shmona Esrei. Whether you're in front of him or on the side of him, if he is davening Shmona Esrei, you cannot be sitting. Says Ramah, even behind him. You have to distance yourself 4 amos before sitting down. Let's say you're dealing with part of davening. Even if you're middle of karbanos, then it's not a problem sitting. So Shita number 1 is you can't sit within 4 amos of someone davening unless you're dealing with tefillah. Continues the Mechaber. There are those who hold that if one is Isaac Bat Torah, even though it's not tefillah, that's also a heter. A third opinion, that's only if you're on the side of the person davening. Aval Kenegda, in front of him. Afilu kamali einav aser, even as far as I could see, you cannot say it. Afilu Isaac b'kriyishma, even if you yourself are davening kriyishma. So let's dive into the Mishnah Berurah over here to understand this halacha. Sivkat and Aleph aser leishi, v'gam smicha aser, leaning as well as forbidden. Ach smicha b'mix has a little leaning. Sheminatal yuchal amud, as we've seen that the litmus test is if you pull that item away, will you fall? If you'll fall, then it's not called leaning, it's called sitting. But if you won't fall, then as a din of leaning, then yesh la'akam acham etchak, there's room to be mekel. Even if you're on a diagonal, 4 amos is enough. You don't need the 4 amos with the diagonal. As long as you're not within the 4 amos, that's okay. Ein prima gadam. Kasav achai adam, says Mishnah Berurah, quotes Mishnah Berurah in Sivkat and Beis. If one is davening and he's standing next to something, something which is 10 tvachim tall, 4 tvachim wide, then mutter leishiv etzad sheni. For example, someone is davening next to the mechitza. The mechitza is 10 tvachim tall, it's 4 tvachim wide. Are you allowed to sit on the other side of the mechitza? Says the Chai Adam, yes. Daha mafsik rishos, because it's a separate rishos. Avalavar mitzad sheni, but to pass by, efshar im ina gavaya kol kach, it's possible. It's not so tall. Shayuchal istakel that you can't see, it is aser. So we're learning already that there's a difference between being lavar and sitting. And we're learning that when it comes to being lavar, if he could see you, you might be in an issue, even if there is a proper mechitza. Efshir, says the Chai Adam, if he could see you, it's a problem. The Chaim Pasuk Elchas Ketanus. The Chaim Mitzadeh Prima Gadol Sim Sadi Sivkat and Hey. Sheish lahachmir, that one should be stringent. La'avar, to pass be'al memorek neged ha'mispalel avshu rishos b'fnei atzim, even though it's its own rishos. V'leishei mati rishos acheres v'lu b'tech harba hamis. So number 1, you're allowed to sit within 4 amos of someone davening if it has the status of a separate rishos. But to pass by, that could potentially be a larger issue. Many machmirim, if he could see you. So we're starting to understand that there's a detail of seeing that's an issue, then there's a detail of being within the rishos. Sivkat and Gimel says the Mishnah Berurah Shalom Mispalel Afilu Im Mispalel. Even if the first person davening he's really finished when asked you to saying tachanunim calls manshal pas, as long as he did not take his 3 steps back, it's considered as if he's in shon asvu adilin in shalavar neged ha'mispalel, the same halacha. Ubei melacharav v'chenis kimachrein parakis that mekayman vu adinim ba'isik beprakim mincha b'shabes gam keimot leishiv v'sadam mispalel. If he's dealing with other, if you are davening, you're dealing with different tefillos, then you're allowed to sit on the side of the mispal. V'yesh matir. There are those that are lenient. When are you not allowed to sit if you're doing nothing? Why? Now we understand this halacha. This guy is davening shmoneh, and you're just sitting next to him quiet. It looks like you don't want to be makabel upon yourself the yoke of heaven. So first opinion said if you're davening, that's one heter. Second opinion says, but if you're learning, that is what learning is. You're connecting with Hashem. So then it would be allowed. It's better to be machmer like the first opinion, meaning only to be mikkel if you're davening, not to sit and learn next to someone davening. Behind him there, if you're behind him, it seems, says the Mishnah Berurah, you do not have to be machmir. That's what we'll call it a double chumrah. The first shayla was whether the Osol halacha is applicable b'la'achrav behind him, and now number two is whether learning is a heter. It says Mishnah Berurah, you do not have to be machmir. Ba'isik v'ateres sevkata zayin. Says Mishnah Berurah, davka moitzi divrei Torah b'sfas, you have to be saying the words from your lips. Aval maharer beliba yinamel, sitting there and thinking in Torah, that does not help. Afilu binyani tikunei atfilos to asal mechshadei. Why? Because if someone sees you, it looks like shein mekavel avol mach shamayim. Again, a lot of zalacha we're seeing is what does it appear to the public. So if you're sitting there, your mind might be in some deep Torah thoughts, but if you're not articulating it with your mouth, perhaps sitting there with a sefer as well, then we have this issue that it looks like you don't want to be mekavel avol mach shamayim. Even if you're all the way in front of someone davening, it looks like he's bowing to you, and that is a problem. If he's a dafka leishiv asar avalamoid, it's going to be mutter. To stand within for amos is not a problem. Perhaps even standing within dalar amos of someone is forbidden. Why? Because you're going to mess with his kavanah. He's middle of davening shmoneh, and you're standing right next to him. Test. Pirush. You're sitting opposite the one davening, you're saying Kriyishma, it still is not the right thing to do. Pri Chodesh like the first opinion, there's no difference, that it's the same Isser. However, it's a toiv. It's good to be machmer all the way, but it's only a taiv. If you're outside the 4 amos, so the person davening bevadei in lahachmir, perhaps his makkah to be mekel, even if you're within the 4 amos. So before we go into Sif Beis, let's take a moment to see some very important dirshus over here. Of course, these are a bit difficult halachos, not being able to be within the proximity of someone davening shmoneh esrei. So let's see some dirshu over here. So firstly, number 1, quote halacha that we learned in Siman Sadi Dalid, that if one is davening shmoneh esrei v'shatzatchak, you're able to lean, but of course don't lean enough that if they pull it away, you're going to fall. What about sitting on the other side of the mechitza, within 4 amos, he said it's mutter, and similarly, with regard to davening within 4 amos of one's Rebbe, as we learned in Siman Sadi, is a problem, but if you're in another rishos, that's going to be okay. The Elamer is like a bima. You're in an elevated area. You're in a separate area. The example we gave is on the opposite side of the mechitza. Would be the same story. And now number 3 says, what if the mechitza is made out of glass? Says the Kaf HaChaim, you're still allowed to sit down. However, to walk by, that's going to be a bigger issue, as we're going to see. Why? Because walking by is a din in kavana. Sitting within Dalet Amos is the thing that you're sitting within the area of the Shechina. But walking is going to be different. We're going to always have to be mindful whether you're messing up his kavana. So in Dirshu number 4 points out, similarly with regard to the Sheikh Sibur, sitting within the 4 amos of him davening, and as well listening to Chazar Tashatz, and you want to be Yotzei Shartzi and says it's also. But now, what about a child davening? Does a child davening have the same halacha? He says the Chazayin Ish, that if a katan reaches the age of chinuch, it's the same Isser. However, the Buchacha comes along and he explains that no, there's no Isser connected a child davening, it is mutter. But the Das Ta'ira says in the name of the Das Kedoshim, who's the same person as the Buchacha, that he's mistabek, and he adds on that Shalavar Kinegdoi mitzad yeser kal. So we continue over here. Now, what about the Mishnah Berurah said as long as he didn't take the 3 steps back. So now, number 5, Dirshu points out even after he takes the 3 steps back, even though there's no isser to walk in front of him, but we're going to see some Kuf Chav Gimel, since there's an opinion to you. Excuse me, one more time. Since you have to take the 3 steps forward, you should be makbin not to walk in front of him until he takes the 3 steps forwards. We said sitting on the side of someone davening is going to be okay. Similarly, if you're sitting to listen to Chazar Tashatz, and now what's the reason of this Isser? So Dirshu number 7 quotes the Torah, the Beis Yosef, that the Isser is what? It looks like you don't want to be Makabel or Malchus Shamayim. You're sitting there silent while someone else is davening Shmona Esrei. The Taz continues, and the Taz writes that within 4 arms someone's davening, Admas Kodesh, the ground is holy. He's talking to Hashem. And if you sit within such an area, you're not dealing with the Davar Shabbat, you're not yourself davening, you're not yourself learning. It's Ke'ilu Maresh Ein Kedusha Sham, startling words of the Taz. You don't look like you think there's Kedusha there. If there was Kedusha there, you just sit there and do nothing. Absolutely fascinating. And we continue. Yeah, let's just see Dirshu number 13 before we dive into Sif Beis. So Dirshu number 13 talks about a very common case, as we're going to see, Kuf Lamed Aleph. What if the tzibur starts saying Tachman, and behind you there's someone davening, they didn't finish one Esrei? What could you do? So you could take the steps back to the sides. Since you're not able to sit within Mali Einav of someone davening, if it's impossible, then you should say Tachlon is standing. And this is going to be a very common halacha that we're going to have to get back to in Siman Kuf Chav Gimel. But for now, let's learn Sif Beis and Gimel together. Says Sif Beis, Yish Mi Shomer Shem Yoshi B'Sadam Misvalel Chalosh Mutter. That if you're on the side of someone davening and you're weak, then you're allowed to sit down. Sivkot and Gimel. Ema Yoshev Yashav Kvar V'Amad Zeh B'Sidai. Good case. Let's say you're sitting, and then a guy pulls up next to you and starts saying Shmona Esrei. Einay Tzarech Lakim. You don't have to get up. He came into your boundary, but says the Ramah, as one can anticipate, this to stand up. And finally, you're not allowed to walk in front of someone davening Shmona Esrei, even for Amos, in front of them. I will stay in Mutter. Laver of Lamed on the sides is going to be Mutter. Everyone knows the famous story of Ramosha Feinstein, in which he stood there, someone was davening Shmona Esrei, and they said, why don't you walk by? He says, a brick wall blocking me. The halacha of not walking in front of someone davening Shmona Esrei in the world of Ramosha Feinstein was like a brick wall that he certainly could not traverse. And we go into Sif Beis. Sif Katan Yud says, Mishnah Berurah, if you're weak, you could sit next to the guy davening on the side. Rutzaleimer. Shiadu Shu Chalash Yev Shalam, you can't stand. You could sit the Cholshazim Kach Yashav. Again, what is the concern of sitting within Dalet Amos is that it looks like you don't care about the Shechina. But if someone is clearly visibly sick, he's not well, so it doesn't look he doesn't care about the Shechina. It looks like he's not well. That's why he's sitting, and that would be the heter. But Davka Leishi B'Sadam is on the side, in front of him, in front of him there are Machmir Miyun if you're weak. Mothers have cut in and out, on this. Obviously, what's better? Better is to move 4 amos away and sit elsewhere. But now we said, what if you're sitting and someone pulls up and says, Shmona Esrei, you do not have to be lakum stand. Says Mishnah Berurah Katan Yabeis Elam Ispal Sarch Lachik. The guy that when Shmona Esrei should distance himself Arbam Zimenik Shretz Lam Ispal. He's Babik V'Loi Sivkatin Yigimel V'Davka Bebeisoi. Aval B'Minyan Kavua. You're in shul V'Koshke Beis Keneses. Sarch Lakim. You have to get up. Why do you makam yuchal b'chol b'nei adam? So this whole heter of you're sitting and he comes next to you is only if it's your area. So he's babik vulai. What are you doing pulling up into my house and starting Shmona Esrei while I'm sitting here? But if you're in shul, if you had a meeting kavua, then of course this is what he's supposed to be doing. Now says Mishmur, what if I bought my seat? It's my seat. Nami ish la'achma, you still should be machmer that if he starts having Shmona Esrei, you should get up. If you're learning, you don't have to get up. Kolshkein Rav, Yeshiv and Talmidim, Leimdim. Let's say so a Rebbe is sitting with Talmidim and he's having a share over there. Uba Asar Misfalim, and all of a sudden pulls in a minion. Ain't Shich Laman Afilu Midas Chasidus Laka, says Mishnah Berurah. There's not even a Midas Chasidus. You're in the middle of a share, you're in the middle of learning, and they come and make a minion. You could continue learning. But the Ramah commented that even though you don't have to stand up, if he starts Shvanasri next to you, it's a Midas Chasidus that you should. Sivkatin Yodalid Kedei Laharim Michshol Mechaver Shasuch like a Shura. It's true, you did nothing wrong. He messed up, he should not have done Shvanasri, but the right thing is to help him out by getting up. And I know that we read Sif Daled, but Sif Daled and the Mishnah Berurah is going to take us on to the next page. So we're going to begin with Sif Daled, which is a little bit of a separate sugya, which is walking in front of the one davening in the next year, B'siyata Dishmaya.